who was at what hotel. And it was really just all littered all over the internet. It was just a matter of collating it all. Yeah. So I think that was the first key to me that I went, man, there is so little check and balance in this particular subculture that it was all just sort of there, littered all over the internet. So, and then when you put it together, you went, Francis Collins has not been, who was formerly the head of the National Institutes of Health. And now he was appointed last month as Biden's interim top science advisor. So he's still very much in the administration. He's still very influential. And you look at his record and you go, there is nothing there that would bar him from being Biden's top science advisor. And, since that time, there have been no direct answers. So since I pointed out that Francis Collins declares himself an LGBT ally, since I pointed out that he really led and launched the initiative into a lot of trans research, including funding trans research on children that gave them opposite sex hormones, vasectomies to young girls, since he directed record level funding to fetal tissue research on organs derived from abortion. Since we went through all of that, there has been no direct response. So the only sort of person who directly said, well, let me put out a little bit of defense of that was the conservative talk show host, Eric Erickson, who I like. I like Eric. We're friendly. But his defense was, I talked to them privately. I'm not going to tell you specifically who I talked to, but these are good guys, which was the same defense that Moore, Keller, Stetzer, Warren offered of Collins was, hey, trust us. We know him. He's a good guy. Yeah. Well, since we kind of went through the record and I put out this story, none of them have responded to me. And I've reached out to several of them multiple times. And just last week, I'll plug another article. A source gave me a recording of an event at the University of Chicago with Russell Moore and Francis Collins. They apparently understood it was not recorded, but someone in the audience was recording and passed that along to me. And in that tape, it was very much a doubling down of mocking the deplorables, as you said, mocking the people who didn't want to get the vaccine, doubling down on defending research derived from abortion, all of that, doubling. And really, in some things that were sort of surprising, you don't have to be a Trumpist to have an issue with the nation's chief science advisor saying that Trump was responsible for hundreds of thousands of COVID deaths. Right. It's just not true.
Right.
And so you look at all of that and, I went and I tried to speak to them about it. None of them will talk to me. But what they tend to do is what you might call subtweet, whether it's
Tim Keller did that the other day. Tim Keller did that the other day.
And if I say, gee, is this a response to me? I get a lot of, well, aren't you very arrogant and full of yourself that you think this is a response to you? And I go, well, what is it then? What are you talking about? Because it's never very specific. And Russell Moore kind of did the same thing last weekend. He gave a message that was about disingenuous Pharisaical questioners and how you don't have to answer them. And I went, is that me? Am I the disingenuous Pharisaical questioner? And I kind of wanted to reply back that, well, Jesus did actually answer the Pharisees. He didn't just ignore them. He gave them some really great answers, in fact. So I would love to hear the response to this stuff. So, at this point, I haven't gotten a response. As I said, I've just kind of gotten these oblique subtweets. And it's really hard to know what to do with those other than to just continue reporting the story, which is what I've been doing and will probably continue to do.
Yeah. I mean, that recording to me blew the cover, not just for what they said, but the way they said it.
Right.
The condescension towards those who disagree with them is despicable. And Collins, I mean, Moore's not an academic. Russell Moore is not an academic. Whatever the reputation, he's not an academic. Francis Collins is. Francis Collins knows how to behave as an academic. And it was shocking to me to see the mockery and condescension directed towards those who disagree with him. And he's also, of course, he's a public official. He's caring for the nation. It just reminded me, as I was talking to my friend Fran Mayer last night. Fran is a good friend from the EPPC and First Things. And Fran was making the comment about how increasingly the elites regard everybody else as colonies. They're not really part of America. They're not really Americans. They're not really worth thinking about or engaging with in any depth. And it just struck me as very sad that here we have Christian leaders who presumably have read 1 Corinthians chapter 1, that not many of the great, not many of the powerful, etc., etc., and yet for whom that teaching clearly means nothing whatsoever. I've really lost patience with these guys over the last 12 months. Were the bad faith actors in the Southern Baptist Convention? Are there some very nasty Trump people out there? Absolutely. But these other guys can give as good as they get. They're simply the mirror image on the other side. And to the extent that they will not call out some of the most despicable things, and what you mentioned there about the trans research, I've got a piece coming out in First Things this week. We need to call this what it is. It is 200 years from now, it will be looked upon as the most significant and egregious government-backed mass sterilization, mutilation, and abuse of children program that the West has ever seen.
Right.
And our evangelical leaders will not speak out about it. I've been writing about this for years.
Right.
None of these guys speak out about it. None of them. Some of them will pat you on the back in private and say, I'm glad you're speaking up. None of them will speak out themselves because they're terrified that people like David Brooks won't want to interview them anymore because they're not nice and polite Manhattan cocktail party people.
Right.
You're not a savior of evangelicalism if you do
Yes, exactly.
One day I'll tell you what I really think about them. There are kids involved here. That's what gets me.
Yes.
This is now damaging children. And if you can't speak up for children, you are not worthy of any kind of leadership position in the evangelical world whatsoever.
Right.
Well, and what medical opinions other medical experts offered. But then I started looking at Francis Collins specifically. And as the director of the NIH, he was not just platformed as a faithful brother. He was specifically, I can give you an example. Rick Warren called him a man of integrity, a man you can trust. And Christianity Today presented him as a man who believes in the sanctity of human life. Well, if you're a pro-lifer and you look at his views, they are not probably going to align with your idea of valuing the sanctity of human life. So what Francis Collins, in his work at the NIH, has funded a lot of research that involves fetal tissue. It involves harvesting organs from, at times, full-term infants, full-term born babies. I don't know the accuracy of these charges, but some medical doctors, there's been reporting, they've come forward saying some of these organs, kidneys, ureters, could only have been taken from still live infants. So that's something I'm still looking into. But we do know that he approved grants for research at the University of Pittsburgh that involved grafting infant scalps onto lab rats. And so that's one issue. And then you turn to another initiative that Francis Collins very personally and boldly advanced. And that was a 4-year initiative for what they're calling sexual and gender minorities, to give money and research grants to specifically advance their health. That's how they're framing it. And some of that research has involved grants to a doctor in California who has given opposite sex hormones to children as young as 8. Another reporter friend of mine who's been doing a lot of great work on this, Brandon Showalter at the Christian Post, discovered that some of these children were foster kids. They had no one really looking out for them.
Wow.
And they're being given these kind of hormones that could be life-altering permanently. And along with that research, there were also girls who were given vasectomies as young as 13. Wow. So some really, frankly, just appalling research going on there. And that's the kind of thing that I go, when you platform this man as a medical authority, I think that's something that a lot of Christians would want to know about his background.
Yes. And, I could see some people saying, well, he is the head of the NIH, but maybe he doesn't direct all of the funding for all of the different projects, which may be to some degree some kind of excuse, but he has actually explicitly come out in favor of the so-called sexual revolution, the LGBTQ revolution, and what he would call sexual minorities. He, at least rhetorically, is completely supportive of the idea that a man can become a woman and can identify as the opposite sex. And this is someone, again, that Tim Keller, that Russell Moore, that David French, all of these people who consider themselves conservative, theologically at least, Christians are all praising and saying that he is a wonderful representative of Christianity when he apparently is starkly opposed to the biblical definition of sex, the biblical definition of gender, and certainly when life begins. As you mentioned, there's a 2010 New Yorker article in which he's quoted saying that he doesn't actually know when life begins, which is exactly why he approved of these grants to do, the stem cell research and, of course, as you mentioned, the grotesque experimentation on babies, aborted babies, through the University of Pittsburgh and elsewhere. So knowing his explicit views on all of that, I'm wondering how he gained such a reputation for a man of integrity, as Rick Warren said, among the evangelical community. How did that happen?
Well, I think you have to look at the fact that he is an incredibly accomplished scientist. He mapped the human genome. He, was one of the leading researchers on that project. He's somebody who is at the very pinnacle of government power. He's running the NIH. It doesn't get much more bureaucratically powerful than that. So I think that certainly played a role. And I'll be honest, as you dug into how people say they met him, I have to say there seemed to be a certain elitist circles going on. Rick Warren mentioned that they met at Davos in Switzerland.
Wow.
At the World Economic Forum. Yeah, which if you're not familiar, that is the gathering of the world's billionaires and heads of state. And so I think there was a sense, maybe just being sort of starry-eyed at having access to somebody who travels in those, very sort of Tony elite circles. So I'm not trying to impugn people's motives, but as you looked into Francis Collins, it was kind of funny, the places that he kept popping up again and again. And in a Time magazine story, they named him one of the Christian intelligentsia and mentioned this very sort of elite book club that he attends with people like the New York Times, David Brooks, and Pete Wenner at the Atlantic. And so you just kept getting the sense that these are people who travel in very rare circles. And that maybe that was part of the appeal, was sort of having access to somebody who operates at such a high level in the world. I mean, not many of us are getting invited to Davos.
Right.